Hello, if you are watching this, you are going to be listening to Pennsylvania's State Report. I'm here with Cherron Perry-Thomas, founder of DACO.
Hello, if you are watching this.
A little bit of audio issue. One
Listen to Pennsylvania's State Report.
I'm going to let
I'm
Cherron
here with
edit her audio while I get this presentation going. But this is the first live one, so we're doing it live, and we'll figure it out as we go. If you're watching, we are going to talk about the Pennsylvania State of State. I'm going to check in with Cherron real quick before we start. Cherron, were you able to find the tab?
Yeah, I'm good. I have the copy of the presentation, and I think
Perfect.
that echo was because I had the other hopping, so I just closed it. I only have the backstage open.
Oh, perfect. Cherron, can you give people some background information of who you are in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, so I like to call myself a vessel, is what I am. So I'm the co-founder of the Diasporic Alliance for Cannabis Opportunities, aka DACO. And we do a conference every year, a 2-day free conference to educate Black and Brown communities about the opportunities in cannabis. And yesterday, our conference was 1 day. And we shared it with our legislators. And I'm also the founder of Black Cannabis Week, which we have. Yes, thank you, Tauhid, for everything. We have for the last 6 days and ending on tomorrow, have had a wealth of opportunity to bring people from all over the country. We've had a Hemp Creek workshop. We've had health and wellness. We've had social justice. We've just done so many things this week. A lot of it has been airing on our live streaming at YouTube through Black Cannabis Week. And we plan on putting a lot of the content there. We're not an organization. We're not a group. We're a culture. So Black Cannabis Week is a culture, and it is for anyone who is looking to help educate, to celebrate, and elevate Blacks in cannabis. So for that, like I said, I consider myself as a vessel to let this information come through to be shared with so many other people. I mean, I can go on and on and on about who I am, but I think in this, that's probably what you want to know.
You have a long resume, I will say. And for people to know is that Cherron is like a mentor of mine. When I first moved to Philadelphia, she really got me engaged with the Philadelphia cannabis community. And so the DACO conference that they hosted in 2018 was the first of its kind. And that was a massive inspiration for the Color of Cannabis conference and the CannAtlantic conference as well. So Cherron, I really appreciate all the education and mentoring that you provide to people, especially those who want to get involved in the cannabis space and bringing them in. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
So we will get into the State of State Cannabis Report. Again, we are doing this live, so pardon any technical difficulties, but hopefully you all see this slide here. And if you don't, please let me know in the stage chat. But I'm pretty sure everyone can see this, what's it called? Slideshow. So we'll get into it. So this says 2019 to 2020 because some things have stayed the same since 2019 and some things we updated as well.
So Tauhid, quick question. Is the presentation able to take over the entire screen? Because we don't have to be here for this.
I think we can take ourselves out and then put ourselves back in. I know I have to keep myself on because I think we have to keep ourselves on because of the audio.
I was just wondering if the presentation could be larger for. I just want to actually. If you can't see the presentation, please make a note in the chat because that's really important, and we know that you.
Yeah. What I can do is also drop the link. I can drop the presentation link for people to pull up too.
Okay.
Let me see if that works.
So like a little follow along.
This is the. Okay, so everyone says that they can see the presentation. So
okay, perfect.
we are good to go. And if you can't, please flag us, and we'll try to fix it. So we have the top cannabis headlines in Pennsylvania. On the top left, you see a recent story by Billy Penn. Thank you, Billy Penn, that talked about the fact that cannabis legalization, that advocates are talking about reparations when it comes to cannabis legalization. And so Billy Penn talked a little bit about the conference, the CannAtlantic Conference, and they also talked about what our legislators saying at the top, Governor Tom Wolf, Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman. What are they supporting in terms of equity in social justice and racial justice? And so reparations has been a conversation that's been had in Pennsylvania. There's also a Philly Mag headline right here. If Pennsylvania is going to legalize adult use marijuana, this is how it should be done. Cherron was quoted in that story as well as I, about if people and politicians are going to talk about legalization, here's what they need to have at the forefront of their minds. Cherron, I want to make a note there because you were quoted in that article too, by Queen Muse. You know, for you, what do you really look for in terms of legalization? What do you really hope is able to get passed and actually implemented within Pennsylvania?
Well, barriers to entry is what is important. You know, when you look at why there aren't as many Black and brown communities, not individual, not people, but communities, why they aren't involved, it's the barriers. A lot of those barriers are to resource, to information. So we want to make sure that the barriers here in this state, as they look at legalization, are reduced. There are no barriers. I think in Oklahoma, the license is $2,500.
Oh yeah, the licenses are there.
Right, exactly. And in LA, as a matter of fact, they don't have to pay to enter into the process, unlike what it has been here in Pennsylvania. And I know recently called for Illinois, and that they had, I think, 75 social equity spots. However, I was on a call with many of the people who did not get one of those spots, but they qualified for it. And some of those people put up their homes, they took out loans, they did things that really put them about 10 notches back, just trying to reach and approach a dream. So we need to make sure, again, that those barriers for entry are reduced or gone.
And so there's been a vocal amount of support now by Governor Tom Wolf, and as you can see on the bottom right, he's been calling out for legalization since late 2019. I also kept an article by the Philadelphia Tribune that has the headline, "Using Weed During Pregnancy, Linked to Psychotic-Like Behaviors in Children, Study Finds." I just saw that headline recently, and I've been curious about learning more about this article and reading this study. But I wanted to keep it up there because there are articles like that are circulating. There are articles that cite studies, and it's a good lesson in media to understand, like, where is this study coming from? Who's reporting it? How credible is it? And really scrutinizing it. And, you know, part of this conference is to change how the media covers cannabis legalization and ensuring that there aren't any sort of misleading headlines. There's no clickbait articles. There's no, suspicious studies cited with no any sort of like authority for the subject matter. So this is I wanted to include that because it's a reminder that there are headlines and studies that exist like that, and sometimes we have to make sure that they are legitimate too.
And I'm glad you did, Tauhid, because for those who don't know, the Philadelphia Tribune is the one of the oldest existing Black publications in this country. And so we already have a stigma when it comes to our community in cannabis. And for them to put this article in there without any balancing is just part of that stigmatizing that has been going on by the press for so many years. I mean, there are so many mothers right here in Philadelphia who have consumed throughout their whole entire pregnancy. I know one, she's had 5 children, A couple of them are equestrians, so and pianists and all that. So I'm looking at this article, and to me, that's fake news. But they should have been able to balance that better.
Yes, and so this is, for those who are covering cannabis, those who want to create content or tell these stories and tell these narratives that are correct and based and grounded in science. Make sure you do your research. I'm going to go briefly through the history of the cannabis space, the medical cannabis market. In April 2016, Governor Tom Wolf signed SB 3 into Act 16, which is our current law. That happened because a bunch of families, mothers, really activated and pushed for medical marijuana to be legalized in Pennsylvania. And it was those stories that showed that cannabis is medicine, that cannabis helps, it can mitigate, it can improve, it can really bring a sense of normalcy sometimes to people who are sick, who are suffering. And politicians were changed. Their hearts and minds were changed. They saw kids who were suffering with seizures and their mothers risking their families' lives, their jobs, to go and find cannabis to administer to their children. And they wanted that access for not just their children, but for other patients as well. So since 2016, it was legalized for medicinal use, for medical use. And in 2018 is when the actual market came online in 2018. The first dispensary opened in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Cherron, do you want to say anything about the, coming on, so to speak?
Yeah, so totally. So one of the things about Act 16, it was great that the Canna Moms got involved. And I think before many people knew it, it had been passed. And not only had it been passed, it had also been passed in a way that excluded so many other communities who probably would have been interested in being a part of this program. In our state of Pennsylvania, we don't have one Black-owned dispensary. We don't have one Black-owned grower. And we cannot continue wherever we are in this country to exclude Black and Brown people from the process when it comes to creating licenses in our different districts and states.
Yep, so that is a very important point. There are no Black owners. And Philly also, even though Philly has a couple dispensaries in there, there are no grower processors in the city. And that could have been job opportunities. That could have been agricultural opportunities, the opportunities for workforce development in a city, in a very, very heavily Black city. There could have been opportunities for that too. But unfortunately, Philly only has dispensaries, and even a lot of them are not reflective of the communities too. So the current look of the program, there's definitely more than 200,000 patients. There's definitely 1,000 plus doctors. There is a myriad of conditions that one could be diagnosed with, and you could qualify for your card. One thing that makes Pennsylvania unique is that I think it was one of the earliest ones, if not the first maybe, to include opioid use disorder as a condition that would qualify you for cannabis. And so there's been an interest in showing how cannabis can help those who are addicted to opiates wean off or at least mitigate some of their consumption there. So that was a pretty unique thing, I think, for this state too. There's definitely more than 50 dispensaries that have opened. And the process for those who are in Pennsylvania, if you are from Pennsylvania and you are not a cannabis patient yet with your card, you can go on the Department of Health's website, Pennsylvania's Department of Health. You can look for a doctor within your actual zip code, so it's actually near your area, because they have a list of doctors that are certified, and that's public, and that's open to the public. So if you Google search Department of Health from Pennsylvania medical marijuana program, it will show up. You can find your doctor. You can find any doctor. You don't have to have a main PCP. You don't have to have a specialist. You can go to any doctor, call them first, and say, hey, I'm looking to become a cannabis patient. I saw that you give recommendations. Can I schedule an appointment? And you can schedule an appointment with anybody who can recommend you. And then once you go through the recommendation process, and we'll talk a little bit about the barriers of entry with just being a patient too. But once you become a cannabis patient, you get recommended by a doctor. You can go on the Department of Health's website, register yourself as a patient. You'll get your card. You have to pay for your card as well. And once you get your card, you'll be able to access all the dispensaries in Pennsylvania. Just make sure you don't drive it outside the state. And then you'll be able to be a cannabis patient as well. Cherron, any other things that, did I miss anything in terms of signing up?
No, I think that's accurate. I mean, obviously, because of COVID-19 and this pandemic, is that many of our appointments, the doctor's appointments, are now virtual. Mm-hmm. So, which was something that we didn't have before. We also didn't have delivery, but that process is happening now because of the COVID-19, and you know, and the medical marijuana program in Pennsylvania is probably, from a medical standpoint, is probably one of the best ones. We're one of the few states that actually has to have a pharmacist or a doctor inside of the dispensary, and so yes, for a medical patient, this is extremely important because it's just like any other medicine. You want to make sure you're getting the right amount, the right titration, the amount, you know, just and knowing, you know, the method of titration and how you're to use that medicine. So you actually have, you know, that type of quality in your dispensaries. And just another thing with that is the testing. I saw a chart recently, and they had the same strain, and they showed this picture of what it looked like in 3 of our neighboring mid-Atlantic states, and the one in Pennsylvania, it sort of looked better, but what was more important is that it had the certificate of analysis, so you knew what was exactly in your product, mm-hmm, and what had gone on your product, which the other states, the other 2 neighboring states, did not have that. So I do see medical patients actually coming to Pennsylvania. Our only problem in Pennsylvania is that we do not have enough flour.
We've been in a drought for so long.
I am constantly getting messages like, you have to order by 6 o'clock because, you know, to pick it up on tomorrow, because they're running out.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, that is one of the serious issues that we have here in our state.
And I forgot to mention too that any doctor can charge whatever price they want for a consultation recommendation. You have doctors who will charge $250. You will have some doctors charge you just a small copay of $20 to $50. You'll have some doctors, and this was early in the program, I hope there are doctors that are not doing this, but I wouldn't be surprised. You have some doctors saying, I will recommend you for 6 months, we'll check back in, and then I'll recommend you again, and we'll keep, you know, you coming to check in every 6 months to make sure that it's working. You have to pay for that recommendation multiple times. So just be aware, call ahead, call doctors, find out how much do they charge, and if it's a price that is just out of your range, don't feel pressured to have to go to one doctor. So just keep that in mind, that that's still been a problem with people who definitely aren't able to afford as much cannabis too. So moving forward, the current rules, we have 25 grower processors, 50 dispensaries, the 3 clinical registrants, and the 8 academic clinical research centers. That's pretty unique, isn't that, Cherron? That's pretty big.
Absolutely. That separates our state from many others.
Can you tell people more about just how different this is?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the research is important. One of the last, I think, universities or one of the most recent universities to come on with research, and I'm really excited about this research because it's around sickle cell. Mm-hmm. And you don't get up, there's not a lot of sickle cell research. And for those people who don't know, sickle cell is one of those diseases that tends to attack the cells of mostly melanated people. So people who are, you know, of African descent, some Middle Eastern descent, and so on. And so you don't see a lot of research around this, period. And so the University of Pittsburgh is actually coming on board with their first ever, I think it's the first ever medical marijuana research study using, you know, obviously the sickle cells. So I'm excited to hear about that. You know, Thomas Jefferson not only is doing medical marijuana, but they're also doing hemp. So, just really trying to create some innovative textiles around that, so when I think of the cannabis plant, I'm speaking of THC as well as non-THC. So all of this research is important to help move us forward in this industry.
And if I remember this correctly, basically, cannabis companies could have applied for this license, and there are some cannabis companies that are working in partnership with multiple universities, one university per one company, but that university is able to grow cannabis for research, and they're able to work with that dispensary as well.
Yes. Mm-hmm,
so that's a huge thing, to be able to have a school grow for research and then provide dispensaries and partners with information data. That's a huge thing for Pennsylvania. And of course, without there being any Black-owned dispensaries or grow processors, we don't have that ability to have that information so readily available, or at least have someone that we know who actually can talk about this process too. So again, lack of diversity in those licenses as well. And then, so no fun edibles. Pennsylvania doesn't have the fun brownies or the Rice Krispie treats or anything like that. We still have pills, and we have RSO, tinctures, oral, anything usually taken by oral is what we sell. So, possession of sale of paraphernalia. I think I kept it there because you could still be fined for having a something deemed as a paraphernalia in your possession, which is very problematic, and that doesn't need to exist. But I think it's still here as a fine. So we're going to talk really quickly, because I know we're getting closer to the end. Three separate bills that are all trying to push for legalization in some way, shape, or form: HB 50, SB 350, and HB 1899. Representative Jake Wheatley introduced HB 2050. Just some overview, highlights allocation of revenue generated by tax would go to affordable housing and after-school programs. Pretty unique here in Pennsylvania. Revenue from tax would also go towards student debt forgiveness, which is nice. HB 1899 is focused on kind of a state-run model, like the way Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board runs their liquor states. This HB 1899 would allow the government and the state government to run the cannabis shops, which Cherron has mentioned to me, like how many alcohol stores are owned by Black people too. That's still not going to make this a diverse market, right, Cherron?
No, and as a matter of fact, in our state, they are actually owned by the state. So that's why we don't call them liquor stores; we call them state stores. Mm-hmm. And if you've ever been in a state store, it's not the best service. They're not the most, it's a job. I mean, it's a government job, and so with that, that's not a place I would want to go.
And then SB 350 has been a bill that has gotten a lot of support, a lot of vocal activists coming out and supporting it too. There's a whole bunch of things in SB 350. Something I wanted to mention: home grow would be an opportunity, micro grow licenses, social cafes, which would be cool, expungement. There's money going into education, loans, and a tax of 17.5% imposed on the retail sale of adult use cannabis. We'll get into SB 350 real quick in a couple slides, but that's the broad overview, and that's led by Philadelphia Senator Sharif Street. So Representative Wheatley had a comparison chart that compares all three bills. We found that pretty useful. We dropped the slides in the chat, but for people who are viewing this, we're not going to go through this entire thing, but we will leave the link for the slideshow to show the comparisons, and also leave a link to Wheatley's website so you can also look at this comparison as well. But just know that there's different comparisons between each bill. A lot of them do share a lot of overlap as well. As you can see, there's a lot of overlap between all of them. Especially, I think the difference that it goes into is we'll see it in the social justice and criminal justice portion. There'll be some differences there. There's also differences in cannabis tax. As you can see in Wheatley's bill on the far left, it provides money to after-school programs, provides money for mixed-income housing programs, which is pretty unique. And then moving to the next comparison, think this is where we get into the difference. You can see in the criminal justice between SB 350, 1899, and 2050. On the far left, you see Wheatley kind of highlight his differences in his bill. That shows, the bill including cannabis clean slate language, decriminalization of the possession of cannabis, and some other various social justice language that's in his bill versus the others. But it's worth reading all three of them because, again, those are the three main ones that have been highlighted and have been pushed in different committees. And there is a lot of conversation just around legalization in Pennsylvania. So it's one to check out all three bills. It's worth checking this out. And they do all expunge cannabis-related offenses, so records will be expunged for that. Cherron, anything that you want to say about these three bills before we move on?
No, I mean, that's a great chart on his site. One of the important things for me is, again, it's that ownership piece, and that's what I do see in SB 350 in terms of that very low barrier to entry. So in SB 350, it was actually proposed that the license would be like any other business license that you would pay, I think it's $125 for. So as the governor now is trying to push and rush this through, I am hoping that a lot of the good things that we see on here will stay intact, and that do not butcher and chop this bill up to make it something that is more palatable for the Republican Party.
Yeah. And speaking of Republican Party, despite having a Democratic governor and lieutenant governor, the Republicans still hold power in both the House and the Senate. And so to even consider some of these bills that are being discussed, they have a very high hill to climb, so to speak. So here's a couple of community issues, if you will. I mentioned that the Republican-controlled legislature makes legalization a very hard thing to do right now. Cherron, you mentioned none of the bills discuss the oversight of social equity and social justice. Can you talk a little bit about that too? Because that's important.
Certainly it is, because you can have the best bill in the world and the best intention in the world, but if you don't have some type of oversight, a committee, a wing of that particular department to look and check and make sure that everything you said you would be doing, you are actually doing. So it's really important that any legislation that we have has that oversight to ensure that, particularly around the social equity and the social justice part, it actually happens, because one of those things is like automatic expungement. But again, if you don't have someone looking and saying, oh, okay, well, this is supposed to be automatic, but I notice you only have 2 people on here. I mean, again, without having somebody actually in place to look at these things, we won't even know.
Yeah, that is very critical, and having the right people in place, which is why, having Shalene Title talk a little bit earlier this morning as a keynote, as having more activists in government places, because these are the ones that are overseeing some of these programs. She's a regulator. She was tasked with, rolling out adult use legalization in Massachusetts. So people have to have good positions in the other side to ensure that some of these things are actually followed through, and people in the government are held accountable too. We also mentioned about predatory doctors. That's still an issue. People, don't have a lot of money, and to spend a lot of money to get a card, which you have to spend for as well. Some people end up paying $300 just to even get access to cannabis. That's a lot of money that can go pretty far for a lot of families, especially in Philly. So there has to be some sort of that needs to be addressed, and that has been something that a lot of patients have been vocal about, is just the sheer financial burden sometimes this cannabis market brings to people. There has always been an issue with Department of Health responding to people's queries and issues. I know a lot of journalists have been pretty public about it too, how long it takes this Department of Health to get back to anybody. And Cherron mentioned social equity and any sort of actual program or language that would speak to equity, reparations, and whatnot, that might be stripped. So, activists have to stay really on top of their legislators so that people know that this is a top of priority thing. And then there's no emphasis on locally owned. There's always that monopoly aspect that can come from outside. Already there's outside dispensaries and cannabis operators, multi-state operators that exist in Pennsylvania. That has always been an issue for locally grown and locally owned businesses too, to compete. So that's going to be a hurdle moving forward.
Yeah, right now we only have three dispensaries that have local ties. The rest are all multi-state operators.
I did want to briefly highlight that this will be included in the slide because I know we're getting close to finishing. But basically, decriminalization, for what it's worth, in Philadelphia was a good first step at the time that it was enacted. It definitely impacted ways that people were being incarcerated and or profiled. However, that still is not an excuse for what is still going on, particularly in Black communities, where Philly police are still harassing Black people for cannabis. Decrim does not provide safety, does not provide safe use or consumption of cannabis. So this was a recent Billy Penn article, I believe, in last year, that's just highlighted that even though Decrim has been around in Philly for a couple of years, a lot of negative attention and unwarranted attention by police are still going into Black communities and doing these things. So I wanted to keep that in the slide to just let people know that Decrim was a good step back then, but it hasn't prevented what we still see in terms of over-policing Black communities. And police cannot explain the racial disparity. That surprise there.
Right. You know what it is, Tauhid, and unfortunately, when I talk to some of the major organizations, they're pushing for decrim, and I keep telling them that Black and brown people are still being arrested under decrim.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So decrim is not the be all end all. Some solutions that can kind of address some of these pain points. Republican controlled legislature, like people out in Western PA and people outside of Philly, still, as many people have reiterated, you have to talk to your elected officials. If you know that cannabis is impacting you, a lot of people feel like, something should be more accessible. They're personally impacted by it, that they need to talk to their elected officials if they want to see legalization happen. And your officials won't move unless they hear from you. The medical marijuana program right now, there's still a high cost of entry for a lot of communities. There needs to be more outreach and education. That's still a huge thing, Cherron. I know that there's a whole lot of educational opportunities here in Philly. Talk about the doctors and really, creating some sort of system maybe that could actually lower the bar for people to sign up to become patients. And with the push for legalization, just make sure that equity and reparations, a lot of community members want to make sure equity and reparations are at the forefront of the conversation. I wanted to mention two things too, the solutions from the community. There's information around a pardon expedited process now in Pennsylvania that I only learned last year, and I'm relatively new to it too. Basically, you can be expedited for a pardon. It used to take a year or 2 years. Now they try to take 6 months max to get someone pardoned if you have certain criteria met and you have a nonviolent marijuana specific conviction. So I wanted to include that in this slide as well, which everyone will have access to. But that is something that is relatively new, and that might be something worth talking to people if you or someone in your family or network has been impacted by a marijuana conviction, a nonviolent marijuana conviction. Make sure you let them know that there's a possibility of an expedited pardon that is worth looking at. Obviously, there are some exceptions as well. So if you just Google search Pennsylvania expedited pardons, cannabis or marijuana, you should be able to find out.
And so Tauhid, and so that is so the Secretary of Pardons is Brandon Flood, and so he spoke about this yesterday during our legislative caucus, and so it's really important to know that we do have a friend and an ally who is in the state, and that is Secretary of Pardons, Brandon Flood. So just remember that name, Brandon Flood, and just Google him, and he will definitely be there to help.
I'm going to type that in the stage.
Yeah, yeah. So he's the ex-felon himself, so he definitely understands the situation. He did admit they only have 6 people in their office, so they are understaffed, but he's doing everything that he can.
Cherron, can you talk a little bit about business opportunities? One thing that we had talked about before here was transportation. You wanted people to know that there's transportation opportunities here?
Yeah, yeah. So when we look at the business opportunities, especially in a more legal adult use, you're talking almost any business from home care to transportation. I mean, you name it. I mean, so we already have some great ideas and suggestions on here. But I just want people to be clear that you don't have to get a cannabis education to have a cannabis business.
Yep.
What you do have to have is a skill set, and most people already have a skill set that they can easily transfer into the cannabis space. So from plumbing to electrical engineering, I mean, you name it. You need to fit it into the cannabis space.
There are possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
Just some quick fun notes. There's a large percentage of the majority of Pennsylvania that were polled support legalization. Philadelphia decriminalized, I believe, in 2014. Does that sound right, Cherron? It was one of the first or one of the biggest cities to do that early on.
Yes.
2014, I think. And then there's been a look at, as legalization conversations have happened in Pennsylvania, a lot of Republicans apparently are coming on board because they've seen that cannabis can bring revenue and generate revenue for the state. Auditor General Eugene DePasquale did a kind of a futuristic prediction that if cannabis was legalized for adult use and taxed at a certain percentage, there would be a $500 million revenue that could be generated from this tax. And that's lucrative to a lot of Republicans now because everyone's impacted by COVID-19. No one wants to raise taxes, and no one wants to cut all these services that they have that are looking to cut. No one wants to do that. So legislators are looking for opportunities to help mitigate the budget deficit that's about to hit Pennsylvania. And cannabis legalization has been one that is starting to see that there could be money for these communities. But Cherron, I know you've also mentioned as well that just because the money is being generated, that it should still go to the communities that have been disproportionately hurt by the war on drugs, and not everybody or everything because of COVID, right?
Absolutely, especially when it comes to cannabis revenue. I mean, as a small business owner, I would love to have some of those resources and funds because we have struggled. However, when I look at revenue from cannabis, it needs to be directed to those communities that have been attacked and marginalized by the war on drugs. So unless we're talking about that, I really don't think that the money should go anywhere else except maybe the patients. Because even though you have a medical card and even though you can go in the dispensary, does not mean that you can buy what you need for your medical condition because it's expensive. So subsidize some of that for some of the people. So when we look at this revenue, let's look at the revenue to put it in some of these places, not just, Joe Blow's steakhouse or something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then last but not least, we are actually perfectly right on time. The way to contact us. Cherron, would you like to give some people more information on how they can contact you? I have your links.
Yeah, so all of this is great. And I just want to invite people to go to our YouTube channel tonight at 8 o'clock, Black Cannabis Week. We have a party with DJ Marv. He's the DJ for HBO. So we're going to have a great time.
Wow.
So the after party for the CannAtlantic is going to be at the YouTube channel of Black Cannabis Week. So come on over at 8 o'clock.
8 o'clock.
It's jam. Bring your gifts, but bring.
And again, this is part of Black Cannabis Week. Shout out to Cherron and DACO for making this entire week such a celebration of Black excellence and those who have been succeeding and working to overcome hardships in the space, in the movement. So Black Cannabis Week will be concluding tomorrow, and the CannAtlantic Conference is so happy to be a part of this instrumental movement and educational opportunity. CannAtlantic Conference information is already there. I will break some news and say that there is a group organizing called the Philadelphia Cannabis Association that will be looking to ensure that equity, reparations, and other issues around cannabis legalization are at the forefront of the conversation. We've been talking and discussing since last year about coming together and really making sure that Black communities and communities of color and other marginalized communities are educated around this legalization attempt and what that means for Black and Brown and communities of color. So if you're interested, if you're in the Philly region and you want to learn more about this organization that is forming, you can email phillycannabusiness@gmail.com.